The world-rejecting religious movement is one of Roy Wallace's three types of new religious movement. As the name suggests, their relationship to wider society is one of rejecting most of what society stands for. New religious movements have particular relationships to transgressive behaviours and practices, especially those which are world-rejecting. The People's Temple was a world-rejecting socialist religious sect that came into international prominence in 1978, when more than 900 members of its community in Guyana, South America, took their own lives by drinking cyanide-laced Flavor Aid or were shot for refusing to do so. Ernst Troeltsch sees sects as small, exclusive groups. Unlike churches, sects are hostile towards wider society and they expect a high level of commitment. Sects tend to be led by a charismatic leader rather than a bureaucratic hierarchy, such as the Church of England, who believe they have a monopoly on the truth. These organisations draw members from the poor and oppressed and typically live communally with restricted contact with the outside world. These particular new religious movements control all aspects of their followers' lives and are often accused of brainwashing them. This was typical in People's Temple. As people and money poured in, Jones capitalised on these resources, requiring loyalty of his members. He urged them towards a form of socialism he called religious communalism. Accusations like these are one of the reasons why sects are viewed as transgressive by wider society, whereas churches and denominations are seen as respectable and legitimate. The People's Temple was founded in 1955 by Reverend Jim Jones in the midst of the Civil Rights Movement, where the struggle against racism in 1950s America had entered mainstream America and led to People's Temple acting as a safe haven for all, due to their message of inclusivity and equality. Responding to the black community's need for a minister offering hope and a black oratorical preaching style, Jim Jones entered their world with both these values and built his church Wings of Deliverance in 1956. Characterized by faith healings and an emphasis on social outreach, the temple's visibly progressive behavior diverged from that of a mainline Protestant denomination. The initial attraction for many members of People's Temple was the message of inclusivity, as the majority of members came from oppression and lower socio-economic backgrounds. The overwhelming majority of People's Temple members were from marginalized groups, mostly ignored within the United States, for example, the uneducated, urban socio-economic underclass, African Americans, the elderly, and anti-establishment Marxists. The group was led by the charismatic self-appointed prophet Jim Jones, whose passion for racial integration and social equality won him praise amongst civil rights organizations, but who, in the years leading up to the mass suicide in Guyana, demanded increasingly authoritarian control over his followers, and due to his drug addiction, grew paranoid by what he saw as a conspiracy by coalition of the US government, the media, and a group of ex-followers to undermine his work and ultimately destroy his movement. In 1974, amidst media interest fueled by former members' claims of physical abuse and questionable financial practices, the temple purchased land in Guyana, South America, and named it Jonestown. In order to convince the other members of the temple to follow him to Guyana to escape the unwanted attention he was getting, Jones warned his congregation that they would have to leave Indianapolis to avoid the coming destruction, presenting himself as a modern-day Moses, leading his interracial community to safety. However, in Jonestown, the temple's focus on socialist, communal living overshadowed its religious origins. Jones's questionable healings, unorthodox preaching about nuclear holocaust, his self-adulation, and his attacks on the Bible escalated to the point of counterproductivity. Jones's determination to create a socially equal commune allowed for an early public image as a caring, benevolent pastor for the poor and defender of justice for the marginalized. During the early years of People's Temple, Jones's followers and famous allies described him as captivating and extremely charismatic. They were taught that charismatic authority is inherently unstable. It's precarious, depending, as it does, upon continued success. Consequently, it is relatively short-lived. This is evident in the months leading to the death of Jim Jones, as his excessive drug use, irrational behavior, and paranoia meant that he was unable to maintain the charismatic persona that made members join in the first place. People's Temple had all the elements of a destructive sect, including slavery-like work conditions, sleep deprivation, Jones's sadistic punishments, whippings, and other horrors that marginalized individuals constantly endured with only high-risk options for escape. Jones's erratic behavior of yelling, cursing, and ordering members to come to the front of church for intensely cruel criticisms which occasionally required members removing their clothes frightened many and soon deteriorated into a place of intimidation. Reitman notes that members were regularly subjected to White Night, meetings which were gatherings at the pavilion in Guyana, where Jones told tales of the world and conducted loyalty pledges to see who would die with and for him. Jones also demanded complete loyalty from his members and gradually forbade them mingling with outsiders, including family members. In addition to the verbal abuse Jones heaped upon members, a number of women and men were subjected to physical and sexual abuse by Jones. Typical of this form of cult leadership, members were prohibited from engaging in sex with one another except for Jones, who delighted himself with the control and freedom of having sex often and with whomever he desired. The spiritual healings that Jones relied on to excite and entice his congregation were all facilitated by using force and deception. In one example, Jones performed one of his usual healings on a woman who had supposedly broken her leg the previous day. In the service, Jones had cut off the cast, and miraculously, the woman's leg had healed. It was later revealed that Jones, with the help of other high-ranking temple members, drugged the victim, put a cast on, and then when she woke, told her that she had fallen and broken her leg. As reports of abuse leaked to the media and family members, government officials were contacted, informing elected officials that family members were being kept against their will. Jones defended his ministry in the temple by stating that such allegations were lies from disgruntled members. American Congressman Leo Ryan, along with an entourage of media figures and concerned relatives of Jonestown residents, visited the commune to investigate whether or not temple members could freely leave the jungle community. On November 18th, members of the temple began to express their desires to leave to Ryan and the other visitors. Jones appeared to allow this, but instead sent a group of temple gunmen to ambush Ryan, the media delegates, and a handful of temple defectors at the nearby land strip. Jones gathered the remaining temple members and informed them that American forces would infiltrate the commune and violently dismantle Jonestown, and instructed them to commit revolutionary suicide. Members were given cyanide-laced flavor aid to drink and give to their children. Armed guards surrounded the pavilion in Guyana and were instructed to kill those who refused. The gunmen on the land strip killed Congressman Ryan, 3 news employees, and 1 defector. 910 men, women, and children died that day under the leadership of Jim Jones. His paranoia and obsession with power became entirely destructive and unsustainable, and inevitably led to his suicide. Using Jim Poling's definition of abuse of power, which is motivated by fear and the resulting desire to control the power of life. This fear and arrogance is then used to create communities in which structures of domination create special possibilities for the privileged at the expense of shared power for all people. The power is used to destroy relationships in exchange for control. Rather than live in insecurity, some people choose to create structures that dominate and control others for personal gratification and false security. We can be certain that Jim Jones's leadership style was an abuse of power, whereby he completely controlled the people in his congregation and used intimidation tactics and physical as well as mental and sexual abuse to keep his followers in a constant state of fear. Moving the entire congregation to Guyana ensured that Jones would have complete control as he played the role of judge, jury, and executioner. We tend to see religion as a conservative and moral force in society. Durkheim, throughout his writings, saw religion as an integrative force and a foundation of collective conscience. The collective conscience is the shared norms, values, beliefs, and knowledge that make social life and cooperation between individuals possible. Without these, society would disintegrate. In the People's Temple, their mission of social integration and equality created what has been described as a family dynamic. Members, unified by church, became extremely close-knit to the point where people would regularly raise each other's children. At the start of People's Temple, we can certainly say that the church was an integrative force, but as they became more world-rejecting, this message of unity seemed to disappear. The survivors of Jonestown found rejoining society extremely difficult due to the negative connotations that are attached to names such as cult and sect, which had been used multiple times in news reports whilst they were away. Wessinger maintains that the word cult dehumanizes the religion's members and their children. It strongly implies that these people are deviants, they seem crazy, brainwashed and duped by their leader. For the original members of the People's Temple, they joined under the impression that this was a church whose sole mission was equality in a time of oppression for many people. Jones took advantage of their vulnerability and used it to oppress them further for his own personal gain.